Christopher Walken is joining us tonight. With 40 years in film, some 90 roles to his credit, and an ability to play anything from the cruelest villain to the most ardent cowbell enthusiast, Christopher Walken, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
For 44 years, Christopher Walken barely said a word about that night. Now, at 83, he's finally talking. On November 28, 1981, he was on a yacht near Catalina Island with Natalie Wood and her husband, Robert Wagner. By morning, Natalie was dead in the water. There was a fight on deck, a broken wine bottle, a 4-hour delay before anyone called for help, scratch marks on the dinghy that no one could explain. What really happened in those missing hours before sunrise? And why did Walken stay silent this long? The truth is darker than anyone ever admitted. Christopher Walken's story begins long before the world knew him by that name. He was born Ronald Walken on March 31, 1943, in Astoria, Queens, and even his childhood had the strange shape of a movie. His father, Paul, was a German immigrant who ran a bakery, while his mother, Rosalie, had much bigger plans for her sons. She wanted them in show business, and she pushed hard. This was not a casual dream she mentioned once in a while. She took Ronald to auditions before he could even read. So from the very beginning, performance was not something far away. It was part of daily life. For most children, the world starts with school and play. For him, it started with studios, cameras, and the feeling that being watched was normal. That early push changed everything. By the age of 3, he was already taking dance lessons, and not in some light, playful way. He learned ballet, tap, acrobatics, and singing, which meant his body was being trained almost as early as his mind. So while other children were just learning how to move through the world, Walken was learning timing, rhythm, control, and presence. By 10, he had already appeared with Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. That is a wild thing to imagine, but it tells you a lot. He was not stepping into television as an outsider. He was growing up inside it. And that kind of beginning can do one of two things. It can break a person, or it can make them strangely calm in places that make everyone else nervous. In Walken's case, it seems to have built that eerie confidence people would later feel the moment he entered a scene. As he got older, that world only became more serious. He attended the Professional Children's School in New York, a place built for young performers who were already living half their lives in the adult world of auditions, scripts, rehearsals, and stage pressure. So this was never random childhood fame. It was a system. It was training. It was a pipeline for kids being shaped into professionals. During those years, he worked under the name Ronnie Walken, and in 1959, he began his theater career in Archibald MacLeish's J.B. That matters because it shows his path was grounded in real stage work, not just cute child appearances. Later, he adopted the name Christopher Walken, and that name would slowly become one of the most unusual and unforgettable names in American acting. And then there is the detail from his youth that people never forget once they hear it. As a teenager, Walken reportedly worked as a lion tamer in a traveling circus. It sounds so strange that it almost feels made up, but somehow it fits him too perfectly. There is something about that image that locks into place right away. A teenager in a cage with lions, quiet, alert, steady, no room for panic, no space for hesitation. Even if you hear that story only once, it stays with you because it feels like the missing piece to the screen presence he later became famous for. He always carried this sense of danger, surprise, and control all at once. And that circus story feels like the kind of hidden chapter that explains how such a presence could grow. What makes it even more interesting is that Walken himself has often downplayed his own ambition. He once suggested that he was basically just following his friends into show business. That line is fascinating because it sounds so small, almost careless, and yet the career that followed was anything but small. He was not somebody who drifted into fame by accident and somehow stayed there. He worked for decades. He moved from stage to film and from film to television, and he built one of the most memorable screen careers in American entertainment. So when a man with that much control, that much strangeness, and that much talent talks as if he simply wandered into it, the contrast only makes him more interesting. It adds another layer to the mystery. By the time Hollywood really began to notice him, Walken had already been shaped by years of stage work. Before he became the actor people associated with danger and instability, he was learning discipline. That is important because his screen presence was never wild in a careless way. Even when he looked unstable, there was always always precision underneath it. He had already spent years on Broadway, and that gave him a kind of hardness that many film actors never develop. In 1966, he appeared in stage productions like Measure for Measure, The Rose Tattoo, and The Lion in Winter. Those are not small credits. They show classical grounding, which helps explain something essential about him. He was never just odd, he was controlled. And because of that, directors trusted him. They could see that even when he played a man who looked ready to snap, the performance itself was never slipping. His first major screen breakthrough came in The Anderson Tapes in 1971, where he appeared alongside Sean Connery. It was not the kind of role that instantly turns a man into a household name, but it put him in the right room. It placed him beside serious filmmakers and made people take notice. Then Annie Hall came in 1977, and even though his role was small, it left a mark. That is part of the strange Walken effect. He could appear briefly and still leave a feeling behind, like the scene had shifted in temperature the moment he arrived. In Annie Hall, he seemed tense, off balance, and quietly unsettling. It was not loud. It did not need to be. He looked like someone carrying a secret that might become dangerous at any second, and that was enough. That quality shaped much of his early screen career. Again and again, he was cast as men who felt cold, unstable, dangerous, or just slightly off in a way that made people uncomfortable. In The Mind Snatchers, he played a sociopathic U.S. soldier. In Annie Hall, he played the unsettling brother who makes the whole room feel wrong. The reason this casting stuck is simple. He did not just act scary. He looked like someone who might do something unexpected 3 seconds from now. His face, his rhythm, even the way he paused could create tension. That uncertainty became one of his strongest tools, and audiences started responding to it right away. And yet, even with such a distinctive screen image, Walken's career never got trapped in just one lane. Over time, he appeared in more than 100 film and television projects, and his films grossed more than $1.8 billion in the United States alone. That is a huge number, especially for someone who never depended on one giant franchise or one superhero role to carry him. Instead, he became the kind of actor directors could place almost anywhere. Crime films, thrillers, horror, comedy, prestige drama, he could move between them all. The impressive part is that he never disappeared into the background while doing it. Even in small roles, he still felt fully like Christopher Walken. That kind of identity is rare, and it is one of the reasons he remained unforgettable for so long. His success also stretched far beyond film. Walken earned 2 Tony Award nominations, 2 Primetime Emmy nominations, and a BAFTA award, which says a lot about the range behind the persona. He received Tony nominations for James Joyce's The Dead and A.B. Handing in Spokane. He also picked up Emmy nominations for television work including Sarah, Plain and Tall, and, much later, Severance. That spread matters because it proves his career was never built on a single trick. He was not surviving on one odd voice, one stare, or one strange energy. He could work across stage, film, and television at a high level. And that is why directors kept returning to him year after year. Still, if there is one performance that truly changed the way the world saw him, it was The Deer Hunter in 1978. That role did more than raise his profile. It fixed his image in movie history. Walken played Nick Chevatarevich, a Vietnam veteran whose mind and spirit are slowly crushed by war and trauma. What makes the performance so disturbing is that Nick does not fall apart in some loud, dramatic way. He fades. He seems to disappear while still alive, and that is somehow worse. The blank stare, the fragile calm, the sudden bursts of panic, all of it made the character feel deeply wounded. The war did not end when he came home. It stayed inside him, and Walken made people feel that. It is the kind of performance that still hurts long after the film ends. That role won him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, and it remains his only Oscar win. But what makes that moment interesting is what it did not do. It did not turn him into a typical Hollywood star chasing obvious leading roles. In fact, if anything, it made him harder to predict. Many actors would treat an Oscar as a launchpad towards safer, bigger fame. Walken moved the other way. He became more mysterious, more selective, more difficult to pin down. That choice deepened his image and made him even more compelling because he started to feel like an actor who could do anything but would never fully explain himself. The Deer Hunter itself was not just just important because of Walken. It became one of the decade's most celebrated films, winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, and Walken's Best Supporting Actor Award. That means his breakthrough was tied to a movie the industry treated as major, serious, and unforgettable. And in a cast that included Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep, Walken is still often the one many people remember first. De Niro drives the story, but Walken gives it its deepest wound. His performance carries softness and danger at the same time, and that combination stayed in people's minds. It also shaped what came next, because filmmakers began to want exactly that fragile intensity from him again. That is how his path led toward Brainstorm, the 1983 film that would become forever linked to Natalie Wood's death. And to understand why that connection feels so haunting, it helps to understand who Natalie Wood already was, long before that final chapter. She was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20th, 1938, to Russian immigrant parents, and from the beginning, her life was shaped by ambition that was not entirely her own. Her mother pushed the dream of stardom with deep belief, almost as if fame had already been promised. According to later accounts, she believed a fortune teller had predicted Natalie would become a great actress, and that belief turned Hollywood into something like a family mission. So Natalie did not simply stumble into films through luck. She was raised inside a future her mother had already decided for her, and that kind of pressure leaves marks early. By the age of 8, Natalie appeared in Miracle on 34th Street, and what made the performance special was how natural she felt. She did not come across as a polished child star trying too hard to charm the audience. She felt real. She held the screen with a kind of honesty that made people believe her immediately, even when she was acting opposite experienced adults. That performance mattered because it showed she was more than just a cute child in a holiday movie. She looked like a real actress in the making, and as she grew older, that promise only deepened. In her teens, Natalie Wood moved from child star into serious Hollywood territory. Rebel Without a Cause brought her an Oscar nomination and placed her beside James Dean in one of the most famous youth films ever made. That role mattered because it revealed a darker depth in her. She was no longer simply the sweet girl from earlier films. She could play confusion, fear, heartbreak, and emotional conflict in a way that felt far older than her years. She did not just grow up on screen. She changed the emotional weight of the films she entered. Her personal life, though, became just as dramatic as her career. Natalie married Robert Wagner in December 1957, and to the public, it looked like a glamorous Hollywood fairy tale. Two beautiful young stars, famous and shining, building a life together. But the image cracked fast. The marriage grew painful and messy, and after only a few years, it collapsed under gossip, jealousy, and rumor. Later reports added even more tension to the story, including claims that Wood had caught Wagner in a compromising situation with another man. Whether people focused on the gossip or on the heartbreak, the result was the same. Their story stopped looking simple, and then, in one of the strangest turns, they married each other again later. So theirs was never a clean love story with a clear ending. It was a loop, a twisted one. There was another detail about Natalie Wood that later made everything feel even darker. She had a deep fear of dark water. Reports say that fear reached back to childhood and may have been tied to a near-drowning incident on a film set, though family superstition may have deepened it as well. According to accounts from those close to her, she had been warned from a young age that dark water was dangerous and somehow connected to a grim fate. So even as an adult, she reportedly felt uneasy around it, especially at night. That detail matters because when you know how her life ended, it stops feeling like a simple fact and starts feeling like a shadow that had been following her for years. All of that is what makes the Christopher Walken connection feel so unsettling. By 1981, Walken was already a major star, and Natalie Wood was already a Hollywood figure with a long, dramatic history behind her. They came together during Brainstorm, where she starred in what would become her final film role. Robert Wagner was there too, and that is where the emotional temperature of the story starts to rise. Walken was not some random outsider whose name got attached later by accident. He was on the yacht trip with Natalie Wood and Wagner during the the weekend that ended in her death. And according to reports and later accounts, Wagner saw him as a threat, not just a co-star. That is why Walken became central to the story. His presence seems to have made an already fragile marriage even more tense. Some reports suggested Wagner grew jealous of how close Wood and Walken seemed while working together. On the boat, with alcohol in the mix and emotions already strained, that jealousy may have turned ugly. Accounts over the years have included talk of a heated argument and even a broken bottle. Whether every detail is clear or not, the mood on that yacht has long been described as icy and unstable, and that is what makes the story stick in people's minds. It does not sound like some grand movie plot. It sounds like a private fight that took place in the worst possible setting, on open water, at night, far from help. Walken himself has remained one of the quietest figures in the entire saga. He never turned the event into a dramatic public confession or some tell-all media tour. When he has spoken, he has treated Natalie Wood's death as an accident and suggested that the real truth belongs only to her because she was alone when she disappeared. That silence has had its own effect. In a story filled with suspicion, gossip, theory, and denial, Walken's restraint made him seem even more mysterious. Sometimes saying less creates a deeper shadow than saying too much, and that seems to be exactly what happened here. That is why this story still stings decades later. Walken matters because he stands at the exact point where fame, jealousy, marriage, and death collide. He was not Natalie Wood's husband, but he was close enough to become part of the emotional pressure that built on that boat. Robert Wagner was not just any man in the story. He was the husband twice over. Natalie Wood was not just any actress. She was one of Hollywood's most famous stars, carrying both beauty and old sadness. And Walken was not just any co-star. He already had that strange, tense screen image that made people feel uneasy even before they attached him to a real-life mystery. So when his name became part of the case, it pulled everything into an even darker shape. On the night of November 28, 1981, Natalie Wood was on the yacht Splendor near Catalina Island with Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and Captain Dennis Davern. At first, it did not look like the start of a mystery. It looked like a private trip that had gone too far. The group had been drinking heavily through the day, and later reports said Wood's blood alcohol level was 0.14%, close to twice the legal limit. That detail matters because it suggests she was already tired, unsteady, and exposed before the night took its darkest turn. What still unsettles people is how ordinary it all seemed at the start. Nothing about it looked like a crime scene. It looked like one of those nights that slips out of control a little at a time until suddenly everything changes. And then it did. According to Dennis Davern, Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken got into a fierce argument on deck. Davern even said Wagner smashed a wine bottle during it. That image has stayed with the case for years because it makes the whole atmosphere feel dangerous in a way that goes far beyond a simple disagreement. Davern said Natalie Wood was upset and embarrassed by the scene and then walked away and went below deck. That moment feels important because it may have been the last point in the night when things still felt contained. After that, the story seems to split open. Before that, it was only tension. After that, it became something far darker. What still haunts the case most is what happened next, or more precisely, what did not happen next. At about 11:05 p.m., Natalie Wood disappeared, but no one on the boat called for help right away. That delay is one of the hardest things to ignore because it was not a matter of a few minutes. Hours passed. A ship-to-shore call was not made until around 1:30 a.m., and the Coast Guard was not contacted until about 3:30 a.m. In open water, every minute matters. Here, nearly 4 hours slipped away before a full emergency response began. That lost time has become one of the loudest parts of the whole story. In some ways, it feels louder than the evidence itself. Then the scene grew stranger. Around 5:30 a.m., the dinghy from the Splendor was found in an isolated cove. It was sitting still. The engine was off. The boat was in neutral. Natalie Wood was not inside. Even more troubling, scratch marks were reportedly found on the side of the dinghy, making it look as though someone may have tried desperately to climb back in from the water. That one detail changes the picture completely. It turns the dinghy from a simple object subject into something eerie and unsettling. It suggests panic. It suggests struggle. It suggests someone fighting to survive in the dark with no one coming. By about 8:20 a.m. on November 29th, Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the Pacific, roughly a mile from the yacht. She was wearing a red parka over her nightgown. There were bruises on her arms and legs, along with an abrasion on her left cheek. What made the discovery even more disturbing was that not all of the injuries could be clearly explained. That is one reason the case never settled into a clean answer. A drowning is tragic on its own, but this did not feel simple. The physical evidence left behind too many questions. Instead of closing the story, it opened it wider. Christopher Walken's comments over the years only added another layer to the mystery, because when he did speak, he rarely said much, yet what he did say always felt deliberate. In 1986, he was asked about Natalie Wood's death and answered with cold brevity. He said he did not know what happened, that she slipped and fell in the water, that he was in bed then, and that it was a terrible thing. What struck people was not only the shortness of the answer, but the mood around it. One journalist described the response as snapped out sharply, with Walken looking icy and closed off. He was not opening the subject, he was ending it. Years later, in a 1997 interview, Walken gave the fullest version he ever offered. He said Natalie had gone to bed before the others, and that later she may have stepped out to deal with a dinghy that was bumping against the yacht. He also mentioned a ski ramp that was partly in the water and said it was slippery. He noted that he himself had walked on it, which gave the detail a personal edge. He was not making a dramatic claim, he was building a plain accident theory, piece by piece, as though he had gone over it in his mind again and again and settled on the version that felt simplest. In that same interview, he painted an even sadder picture. He said she may have been half asleep, wearing a coat, then slipped, hit her head, and drowned. The image is painful because it strips the moment of drama and leaves only helplessness. He also insisted she was not the kind of person who would harm herself, and said everyone cared for her. That tone matters. He was not just explaining an event, he seemed to be pushing back against the idea of something hidden or violent. He wanted it understood as a terrible accident, not a secret crime. Later, he became even more direct. Walken said that people who believed there was more to the story would never be satisfied because, in his view, there was nothing more to it. It was an accident. That statement felt almost final, almost irritated, as though he had grown tired of the same suspicions circling the same night for decades. He did not leave room for intrigue. He shut the door as firmly as he could. And then, in 2011, when the case was reopened and cameras caught him again, he said nothing at all. No quote, no explanation, no visible emotion. He just kept moving in silence. That silence became its own kind of statement because people often read more into what is not said than into what is. After years of short comments and flat denials, the absence of any response at all gave the story another strange tension. It was not a clue, but it felt like one. The case itself took a sharp turn in 2011 because Dennis Davern changed his story. For years, he had given police one version of the night. Then, he came forward and said he had lied back in 1981. He now claimed that Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood had a violent fight before she disappeared. What made that new version so explosive was not just the idea of a fight, but Davern's claim that Wagner delayed calling the Coast Guard. That brought the focus right back to the long missing stretch of time. Suddenly, the delay no longer looked like confusion or panic. To many people, it started to look like something closer to concealment. As the story shifted, Robert Wagner was pushed into a harsher light. Investigators eventually described him as a person of interest. That is not the same as a criminal charge, but it is still serious, especially in a case that had already lived so long in the public imagination. It meant detectives were no longer treating him simply as a grieving husband caught in a tragic night. They were treating him as someone who might know more than he had admitted. Wagner denied any involvement, but the language alone showed how far the case had moved from rumor into something much more active and troubling. Then more pressure was added in 2018 when investigators said 2 new witnesses had come forward. One claimed to have heard a woman screaming for help in the water. The other said there had been a fight on the back of the Splendor. That mattered because for years Davern had stood almost alone in describing a violent argument. Now, suddenly, there were voices that seemed to support the darker version of events. Investigators reportedly considered these witnesses credible. That gave new weight to the idea that the mystery was not built only on fading memory or gossip, but on multiple accounts pointing in the same direction. Even the official ruling changed. Natalie Wood's cause of death was revised from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That may sound technical, but it changed the feeling of the case in a major way. It meant authorities could no longer confidently stand behind the simplest explanation. Questions about bruises, injuries, and gaps in the original investigation had become too serious to ignore. Once the word undetermined entered the record, the story stopped being a closed tragedy and became something much heavier. It became a permanent shadow. Even so, no one was charged. By 2022, investigators said Robert Wagner would not face charges, and he was later treated publicly as cleared. That gave him relief after years of suspicion. Yet the case itself never truly closed. It remained open in a legal sense, and Natalie Wood's official cause of death still carried that word undetermined. So even after the pressure on Wagner eased, the central mystery survived. The question that started on that yacht never really went away. What happened before Natalie Wood entered the water still has no final answer. The strange pull of the story grew even stronger because of Brainstorm, the film that linked Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood in the first place. It was supposed to be a bold science fiction drama about recording human memories, but after Wood died during a break in filming, the movie stopped feeling like ordinary fiction. It began to feel haunted. Every scene she had already completed took on a painful new meaning because audiences would later watch her knowing it was her final screen performance. That alone gave the film an eerie place in Hollywood history, and the subject of the movie made it even more unsettling. Brainstorm was built around a machine that could capture a person's full experience and replay it for someone else. In that story, memory becomes something that can be stored, replayed, and relived. That is exactly why the film feels so haunting now. A movie about preserving moments became tied forever to the final chapter of Natalie Wood's life. The irony is hard to escape. A story about replaying experience became forever linked to replaying loss. The trip to Catalina only deepened that feeling. It was not just some random getaway. It happened in the orbit of the film, during a time when the cast was already under pressure. Walken and Wood were said to have worked closely and gotten along well, and reports over the years suggested that Wagner may have been uneasy about that closeness. Once tragedy followed, the public became fascinated by the triangle. That is part of what makes the case feel so gripping even now. The boat trip began like a normal outing, but it ended as one of the most discussed nights in Hollywood history. The film itself nearly died with her. After Wood's death, there were serious questions about whether Brainstorm would ever be completed. The project could easily have been abandoned and written off as another Hollywood disaster, but director Douglas Trumbull fought to finish it, arguing that the film should be completed as a tribute rather than buried. That decision gave the movie an even sadder weight. It became more than a film. It became a production trying to survive real grief while carrying the memory of someone who never came back to finish it. And through all of that, Walken's silence remained part of the unease. He never turned the event into a public narrative of his own. He gave a few brief statements over the years, but he refused to keep reopening the night. At one point, he said no one truly knows how Natalie died, and that the truth belongs only to her. Later, he made it clear he had stopped talking about it long ago. That refusal left a vacuum, and people filled that silence with theory, suspicion, and imagination. In a case already built on unanswered questions, silence only made the shadows feel deeper. One of the reasons the story remains so powerful is that the missing 4-hour gap still feels impossible to ignore. If Natalie Wood went into the water around 11:05 p.m., then those first minutes were everything. Cold water does not give people much time. Survival chances drop quickly. That is why the delay has become the emotional center of the case for so many people. Even if every other detail stayed uncertain, that long stretch without a full emergency call would still feel devastating. It leaves behind one unbearable thought. If help had come sooner, she might have been found alive. Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, has kept that tension alive as well. She has said repeatedly that Natalie was afraid of dark water and would never have willingly gone out alone at night in a small dinghy. That detail matters because it changes the frame of the entire story. If Natalie truly feared dark water that deeply, then the idea that she simply climbed into a dinghy by herself becomes harder for many people to accept. And once that possibility starts to weaken, darker possibilities move in. Christopher Walken Walken's silence also keeps drawing people back. To some, it looks cold. To others, it looks careful. His supporters argue that he was never at the center of the drama and simply refused to feed a media storm. His critics argue the opposite. They say that if he truly knew nothing, he could have spoken more openly and more often. In a case like this, silence never stays neutral. People treat it like a clue, even when it may be nothing more than refusal. That is also why the case still feels alive. It was reopened in 2011 after new information came in, and for years afterward, it continued to be treated as unresolved. That alone is remarkable. Natalie Wood was one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, and yet the final chapter of her life still sits under a cloud of doubt. The word undetermined keeps the door open. It keeps the mystery breathing, and because that door never fully closed, neither did the fascination.